Good afternoon. Welcome to the Grace Shepherd's Memo. It's episode 19. I'm Pastor Darren. Glad to be with you here on this day after Resurrection Sunday. And we had a wonderful day together yesterday as God's people gathered virtually online. It wasn't the Resurrection Sunday or Holy Week that we imagined, but it is the one that God had ordained for us. And I just want to assure you that when we gather back together, we will properly celebrate the resurrection as a corporate body together. But what happens after Easter? Sometimes we can get discouraged because we use these holidays as a benchmark, and then when we don't meet them or once they're over, there's that letdown on the other side. Well, in Luke chapter 24, we see what happened on the other side. And there was those who were discouraged as well. And it's a familiar story known as the road to Emmaus by many. But it says in Luke chapter 24, beginning in verse 13, that very day 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, so just outside the city where everything had just happened. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Does that not amaze you? Their eyes were kept. And same thing happened to Mary. Just remember that. She didn't see him either. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he went to said to them, "What is this conversation you're holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them named Cleopas answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that happened in these days?" So often as I'm driving, every year as I drive to church on Sunday morning, on Resurrection Sunday morning, I'm always frustrated because it's so quiet and sleepy. Now granted, I am one of the first people up on my way to church, but I always roll down the windows and I want everybody to know, and it's like as if I want to yell, because do you not know what has happened? And sometimes we feel that, but I want to tell you a couple things that we can get from these guys on the road to Emmaus who are sad at what has happened. They recount the story as Luke tells us to Jesus, what they've heard and the reports of the women and the disciples, but they're still unsure about what's happened. Well, let me give you 3 things that you can do today in post-Resurrection Sunday. Slow down. I had a professor of mine in college and a mentor of mine who wrote an anthem called Slow Down, and the subtitle to it was "For Everyone Who Walks the Emmaus Road." And the encouragement is to slow down. Even in these days where we've been put on pause, but I have talked to so many people who say they feel busier than ever, and myself included. And we need to remind ourselves to slow down. Slow down, and number 1, see Jesus. It says in verse 24, and I always found this verse funny because after they explained to Jesus what had happened, and the last part of it, some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. It's the pot calling the kettle black. They're not seeing who's right in front of them. But what is Jesus' response to them? Well, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" So let's slow down and see Jesus. Secondly, slow down, and as Jesus says, hear him. Slow down and hear Jesus. They were face to face with Jesus. They didn't hear him, but Jesus' word is clear. From Genesis to Revelation, he has revealed his plan. God has worked out his plan. Slow down, as my professor wrote in his anthem. He says, slow down the noise that crowds out the Savior speaking. Slow down and hear his voice. And after the 2 men had spent some time with Jesus, they slowed down and they were intrigued. And I've heard pastors over and over say, one of the first things I want to hear is that message that Jesus preached to these guys. It would be fascinating to see what Jesus said. But slow down and see Jesus. Slow down and hear Jesus as revealed in his word. And slow down, thirdly, and feel Jesus. Now, what do I mean by that? When Jesus appeared to his disciples, just a few verses later, it says about them, they were talking about these things. When they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace to you." But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." When we reflect upon the hands and feet of Jesus, the wounds that he suffered on our behalf, we can feel the peace that only he gives. Jesus says in John chapter 14, he says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." How do we feel Jesus? We feel the peace that only he can give in troubling times. So my encouragement to you is slow down and see Jesus, slow down and hear Jesus, and slow down and feel the peace that he gives. Draw near to him as he drew near to them, and he will give you peace. Have a wonderful, blessed rest of your week.